This is the USA Emergency Broadcast Network, your source for reliable disaster preparedness information.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of this station, its management, sponsors, or other hosts. If you have any comments or suggestions about this program, please contact us at radio@usaebn.org. That's radio@usaebn.org.
Welcome to a new Zeta report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live first Mondays on the Blog Talk Radio site, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We are joined, as usual, by Nancy from ZetaTalk.com and PulseShiftNing.com. Welcome to the show, Nancy.
Oh, I'm so pleased to be back. Folks, in partnership with USAEBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate, but have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit ZetaTalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. Now, questions from the chat and issues raised in the chat will be addressed toward the end of the hour after the main feature has been presented. Today we're going to discuss flying. Is it safe to fly? Specifically, electromagnetic pulse taking down large fly-by-wire airplanes. Some examples. Now, this is not theory. This is quoting newspaper articles. This is quoting what has been discovered, what happened, and you can formulate your own conclusions. Electromagnetic pulse is on the increase due to the charged tail of Nibiru. Now, this is in the opinion of the Zetas, which will increasingly waft over the Earth as the passage nears. Where this creates static on the radio and telephone, faltering internet transactions, and brownouts and surge in electrical appliances, it is truly deadly when it hits airplanes aloft. Fortunately, only certain places around the globe seem prone to this EMP onslaught. Plate borders being pulled apart or regions of the globe under rock stress are vulnerable. Now, we'll give specific examples as we step through, and you'll note that, and I will mention in point 2, how these fly-by-wire planes were afflicted as they crossed over plate boundaries or areas where, due to the rock stress, according to Zeta predictions and Zeta analysis, an electronic screech emerged. What this is air bubbles compressed out of rock so that electricity can flow through that rock without encountering little insulated air bubbles. This means that there's static above the rock. For instance, ahead of an earthquake, when the rock is under stress, it often is hard to listen to the radio. You get a lot of static. Pets are uncomfortable with this screech. They want to flee and leave home. It's the clue that animals have that something is right around the corner. Our first example is Air Force 447 in 2009. The first undeniable example of this deadly strike was in 2009 when Air France 447 was exactly over the mid-Atlantic rift. That's that large divide between North American continent and the Eurasian continent in the North Atlantic, and then as it curls, it goes between Africa and South America. That's the great, and it sometimes is called the Atlantic Rift or Ridge, but in fact it's where these continents are pulling apart, and there's a lot of hardened magma there. According to the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, this is like a third magnet on the surface of the globe. Yes, the plane met with air turbulence, which they cited, but most telling was that all the automated systems reported clicked out one by one, were failing. Ultimately, and I mean there was like 23 of them in a row, ultimately the disaster was blamed on pilot incompetence. Well, how did he manage that, to turn off all the electrical systems? Quoting Reuters, 4 hours into the flight, the plane encountered heavy turbulence. 15 minutes later, now a long way out to sea, it transmitted an automatic signal indicating the plane was in serious trouble. A succession of a dozen technical messages showed that several electrical systems had broken down, most ominously the pressurized system, a totally unprecedented situation in the plane. So it got into the media, and then it didn't. And then they ended up blaming the pilot because he didn't know how to fly through rough weather. That's what. I mean, they weren't going to say electromagnetic pulse because they have to say why. And until Nibiru is in the media and admitted, you're not going to hear anybody say it's not safe to fly on these planes in these parts of the world. And toward the end of the hour, if we have time, Andrea and I are going to discuss how they seem to be getting ready to do a full admission that Nibiru is in the inner solar system. But
drip,
that's
drip.
a little later.
Yeah, we hope so.
Drip. But this is a rapid drip. This is kind of like a fire hose of information.
Well, again, Nancy, just to interrupt real quickly, these are some of the clues that we've been putting together over the length of our time together here on USA EBN. But one of these things is EMPs can be severely localized, and that's kind of where we're going with this. Imagine, if you will, you've seen those earthquake lights and the light pillars and that sort of thing. Imagine, if you will, that is an electromagnetic pulse coming out of that rupture or plate movement, and that is going directly through the air above it, how it could affect fly-by-wire aircraft. That's where we're going with this. Is it safe to fly? There's other reasons planes fall out of the air, but these specific ones are very telling.
Yes, exactly. And actually the old planes that have push-pull operations where the pilot can control the flaps, let's pull up, let's pull down, that kind of thing, to maneuver and put the plane into a glide and a controlled glide, they're a lot safer. I mean, they're not going to be affected in the same way. Fly-by-wire, as we're going to discuss, are completely electronic, so that between the pilot and the plane, its operation, there's computers and electronics, and the pilot cannot control. If the electronics goes, that's it. You don't have a pilot. It's out of control, as we're going to get into. MH370, Malaysia 370. The next most notable incident of a major airline being affected by electromagnetic pulse was the MH370 disappearance in 2014. The floating blame for this is still unsettled, moving from pilot suicide to the plane being kidnapped for nefarious reasons. As usual, the airline company, airplane manufacturer, and the Malaysian royal family were not to be blamed. But why did MH370 disappear from radar and then reappear on radar, flying out into the Indian Ocean? Is a suicide pilot able to do that? Radar, of course, is also affected by EMP. Quoting Al Jazeera, according to FlightAware, a flight tracking website, the jet leveled off at 35,000 feet 19 minutes into its flight and then appears to have stopped transmitting any data. Okay. And the FlightAware shows that it disappeared from radar. I was able to capture that from the websites at the time. Notably, MH370 passed over the edge of the sun to plate boundary, and the radar began to sense the plane again after it was past that point. What the heck is the sun to plate? The sun plate is vulnerable to EMP because, in the opinion of the Zetas, this portion of the Eurasian plate sticking out under Indonesia is being pushed down under the curve of the Indo-Australia plate. This causes Sumatra and Java to be squeezed down, compressed under the rock of that curve of Sumatra and Java. And this causes rock compression, electronic screech, and therefore the whole Sunda Plate region, of which these planes from Malaysia flying up to Beijing or wherever cross over, are subject to this possibility of this screech. MH370 was tracked going out into the Indian Ocean, heading down toward Australia, where the search for this downed plane is still in process today. They did this by what they call the ACARS system, which is where the airplane transmits to some satellite and the data is recorded. And they got that transmission as it was flying down toward the western side of Australia. Now, when you have electromagnetic pulse, you have damaged computers. But these big planes, they have more than one computer that handles autopilot. And they put their flight path into these autopilot computers. So therefore, God knows what was remaining and it was alive and functional on that plane. It could have been that one of the autopilot computers survived in part from that electromagnetic pulse and was directing the plane to take a path, that it had in the past at some point. We just don't know, but it clearly did that. In the opinion of the Zetas, MH370 became a ghost plane, the pilots and passengers dead from lack of oxygen, flying via one of these autopilot computers. Okay, the next one, Malaysia 66. Now, this guy did not go down and disappear, but what is very telling, it took the very same path that a Malaysia 370 did, flying up toward Beijing, right? Very same path. It also suffered electromagnetic pulse, and very same airline, very same location, flying to Beijing. One of the engines began making noises. This was like 2 weeks later. A hasty emergency landing in Hong Kong was arranged. Quoting the Daily Mail, one of the engines sounded really weird. When they took off, she heard a funny crackling noise, and she heard it again a couple of other times. Passengers put their life jackets on, and they were close to chaos as the plane was plunged into darkness. All of the lights went out. Okay, this sounds like more than just the engine, because the engine is one thing, but the lights are another. It was having EMP problems, but not to the degree that the plane was completely devastated. Very telling. Same location, same airlines. Okay, GermanWings. Then there was the GermanWings crash into the Alps in 2015, ascribed to pilot suicide. This goes almost unreported, is the high incidence of EMP in Europe, which is under an almost continuous stretch. It's being pulled apart. And people there, I know from email, have a lot of problems with connecting with the internet at certain times and the like. So because you can have compression, you can have pulling apart, or plate boundaries. These are the susceptible regions, and Europe is a susceptible region. Evidence that the electronics on the plane had been knocked out was kept from the media as usual to protect airline profits. They blamed the pilot. He was planning a suicide and he flew it into the Alps. Well, they said that about the Malaysia pilot too. Just so sad. This guy had how many decades of exemplary service, was a good very stable, but oh no, he had to be pilot suicide. Okay, quoting Scott.net, why no mention was made by investigators of hearing the loud, strident beeping made by the cockpit door console when the emergency access code is entered to open the cockpit door. The emergency unlock code would have been overridden by someone in the cockpit manually holding the button down, but this would not have prevented the beeping once the code was entered outside. This would have been the clearest confirmation that one of the pilots had been locked out, yet no mention was made of it. Now, they claimed that one of the pilots went to the bathroom and the other ran it into the Alps. And the pilot that was sitting there and committing suicide refused to open the door. But those who know the mechanics said you would have heard people outside the door entering the code, beep, beep, boop, bop, or talking on the intercom, open the damn door, that type of thing. And that
or
didn't
pounding
happen.
on the door,
Pounding on the door, that wasn't there
definitely.
either. Right. Yep. Okay. CERN, which was nearby. As a matter of fact, CERN is practically a stone's throw from where the Germanwings went into the Alps, right next door. In the days preceding the Germanwings crash, CERN, just miles away, had difficulty operating, and there were numerous unexplained blackouts in Europe during the days also. This is leading up, the 4 or 5 days leading up to the Germanwings crash. Quoting the CERN website, while full-scale tests of all systems were ongoing in preparation for beam injection, an earth fault developed in the main dipole circuit of Sector 3 to 4 of the Large Hadron Collider. All the protection systems worked properly and there was no harm done. The fault developed at relatively low current and was initially intermittent in nature. So they couldn't get it working, and et cetera. And I'm not reading all the evidence of blackouts across Europe, but okay, here's an example of electromagnetic pulse affecting radar because of the stretch. Now, the Zetas have said river bottoms are thin places in the crust, and therefore when there's pulling apart, they tend to snap and exhibit a lot more signs than thick places that are hills or mountains. So the Danube, we had planes running all the way down the Danube, and this was in the same general time frame as Germanwings, just after, in June of 2015. Several planes went missing from radar along the Danube river course, one of the most vulnerable locations for the Zetas in a region under stretch. Riverbeds are thin spots in the crust, thus they sag and being thin, pull apart more readily. Quoting the Telegraph, an air safety investigation has been launched after 13 planes flying over Europe disappeared from radar in 2 unprecedented blackouts. Air traffic control centers in Austria, southern Germany, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia all reported the same problem. So far, experts are at a loss to explain what caused the aircraft to disappear. So that's an example of CERN and the Danube situation showing you that Germanwings, in addition to the beeping in the cockpit being missing, et cetera, it was likely an electromagnetic crash of a plane. Okay, the most recent one, the Egyptian MS-804. This just happened, 2 months ago? And finally, we have among the most notorious EMP examples, the recent Egyptian crash of MS-804 in the Mediterranean just north of Egypt. This was, significantly, precisely on the plate border between the rolling African plate and the Eurasian plate. In fact, MS-804 flew along this plate border for some distance before finally falling prey to EMP. A flash in the sky was seen, which could have come from one of the jet engines, as EMP will cause a jet engine to explode when the turbine stops rotating to exhaust the burning fuel. In other words, you're not getting it puffed out the back, but the fuel is still flowing, and into the combustion chamber and igniting. So it's an explosive situation. Significantly, that area on that day was being hammered by earthquakes during the African Roll. The African Roll is where according to the Zetas. It's the top part of, Africa looks sort of like a ice cream cone, and the top part is lobbing over towards Saudi Arabia and will pull apart from Gibraltar, as the Sinai will pull apart a bit, and the bottom part will slide out into the Atlantic. Now, this is all in the opinion of the Zetas, a process which is very slowly moving and picking up speed over there. But boy, you should see the earthquakes. It was just covered with them, 20 different circles, in the 4 to 5 range. Significantly, the automated messages from the ACARS system indicated the electronics were faltering. Though smoke was mentioned, these types of messages can be merely indicative of a faltering electronic system, per experts. The message indicating faltering electronics continued for a full 3 minutes. Then communications cut out, but the plane flew for a full 7 minutes more before going down. Quoting the Mirror, experts have warned the messages of smoke on board are unverified and may be a result of electrical problems rather than definitive evidence of what happened. Now, I wanted to mention that the plane flew along the border of the African plate in the Mediterranean. From Italy, it kind of goes down toward the Red Sea and then it traveled right along that plate border, and there had been all kinds of other problems with EMP in the Mediterranean, too much to cram into 1 hour. But take my word for it, it's there. Significantly also, MS-804 indicated the electronics were confused and faltering by swerving first left by 90 degrees and then a full 360 swerve to the right. This was caught on radar. This is not the signature of a bomb nor of a fire. It is the signature of an aircraft out of control with surging and fading electronics. This surges, then it backs away, then that surges, and the plane says, whoa, to the left, whoa, to the right. That doesn't sound like a bomb. Now, fly-by-wire. All of these planes that I have mentioned are fly-by-wire. What does that mean? They're considered the most stable and reliable. The A370 range, the Boeing 777 range.
Right.
They're just wonderful. They're smooth. The pilot can't make an error. You sit down and you push a button and you arrive. It's just and steady, reliable. They're wonderful, and they're just out there in droves because of this. They are highly automated, with the pilot thus having many assists from automation. This also means that there are no routes by which the pilot can control the aircraft when the electronics goes crazy, surging and fading erratically. To quote Wikipedia, the most well-known are the normal, alternate, direct, and mechanical laws of the Airbus A320 to A380 in that range, and Boeing's fly-by-wire system, and the Boeing 777, 787, and Dreamliner and Boeing 747-8. Now, these are those favorites. Air France 447 was an A320, as was MS-804. MS-370 was a Boeing 777. And the MH-66, which had those engine problems and blackouts, was an A320. There you go. So, magnetics. Mankind's electronics are fragile and can be damaged by electromagnetic pulse. This is why equipment is protected by surge control devices, which shut down under either an electron surge or a brownout, equally as damaging. Where the electron flow drops too low, both can devastate electronic equipment. As is well known, magnetons and electrons like to flow together, electromagnetic, blah, 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 as a flow of electrons is generated by spinning a magnet inside a curl of wire. Solar flares can send a flood of both in the direction of Earth, along with many other particle flows, causing static on radios and interfering with TV reception. Well, I got to tell you, coming from the tail of Nibiru, and it's a big magnet, and it's pointing its north pole at us, blasting away as we've had all this irregular patterns on the Batra's modeling of the Earth's magnetosphere, and it shows, that the sun is asleep during those times. Whammo! So we have increased EMP, increased blackouts and problems, and people saying, I lost my internet connection, or the cell phones are crackling, or whatever, and that's not the sun. Okay, electromagnetic pulse is not caused by the sun, as these airplane disasters have no relationship to activity in the sun. The sun, in fact, has been super sleepy this past cycle, yet there is a measurable uptick in the assault of the Earth's magnetosphere since 2010. In the opinion of the Zetas, electromagnetic impact on mankind's electronics is related to the approach of Nibiru, setting up for another passage. An additional factor in airplane crashes is flying over water. While flying over a plate boundary where the plates are being compressed or stretched, the electronic screech the Zetas warned about, you'll notice how often something is over water. Air France 447, over water. MS 804, over water. GermanWings had just come off the water. So what we're and then the whole Thunder plate thing, MH370 and its counter, its twin MH66, they were over water when they got struck. And it's similar to being struck by lightning, where they say if there's a lightning storm, don't sit out there in the middle of the lake in your little rowboat. Get to shore, because when you're over water, you're asking for it. Water is a good conduit of electricity. Well, Andre, how are we doing? And should we jump into the prongs? It looks like we have plenty of time for that.
Well, actually, Nancy, what I was looking at, I was following along with the different tail numbers that we're talking about, MH370 and all of those other ones, and it seemed to be that you've put all of these things that we're talking about together on this week's newsletter, which I was posting into the Blog Talk chat room. It talks about the fly-by-wire and explains that some of these pictures really do help out when you're talking about these aircraft flying over those problem areas of the plate movements, to look at it on a map as we have. I did it on the social media promo for the site, but I know you will also have it on the YouTube when that comes up too. But if folks out there want to check out the current issue of the Zeta Talk newsletter, you can look at pulseshift.ning.com. That's pulseshift, one word, .ning.com. And like I said, Nancy, it really helps me especially to kind of visualize, because I know when MS 804 went down and they were talking about the telemetry of it, doing a 90-degree turn and then a 360-degree turn the other way, a lot of the experts or I don't know, crash experts or investigators that were on the television were talking about a loss of power and a flat spin, where the plane just starts flipping around one way and then will fall down like a leaf with under no power. But they never really addressed what knocked out the power.
Right.
You notice that? They won't.
Yes.
They won't.
Yes.
They instantly blame it on the pilot or something else. But if there is no explosion, it's hard to put a finger on this. And a lot of these points of interest or points of these crashes all happened relatively in the same sort of flight path in that area. And even with the Hong Kong flight, which I looked up online, I still haven't figured out what knocked out 3 generators. There's generators on each of the main engines on that aircraft, and then also an auxiliary power unit, or an APU, which is in the tail. And all of them went out on the Hong Kong one. I forget the flight number on that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Nancy, but
66, I believe it was, wasn't it?
66. That's correct. Yep.
Yeah, 66. Yeah.
So it's hard not
good
to
for you.
explain it without EMP. It's almost like a lightning
Yeah,
strike.
they keep under investigation, but they were so quick to jump in and blame the pilots. I would just get enraged. The poor pilots. The pilot was
they have no
incompetent.
control.
He was suicidal.
Oh.
And what I was really happy to see was this Egyptian plane 804. They didn't do that. Egypt refused to do that. They said, we don't know. We're still looking into it. He didn't say, we broke in and kicked down the door of the pilot's house like they did in Malaysia and stole all his paperwork because we're sure he had a nefarious plot and he stole the plane and he took money or whatever. It was really a horror to me. So if they're getting to the point where they're saying we don't know, or it's under investigation, that's so much better than demonizing the poor pilots. It infuriated me.
Yeah, it's tough. It's all they'll cover your bases, or CYA we call it. I'm not going to use that term on the air, but also I just want to follow up too that if you folks out there want to do your own research, a good place to start, like I said, was the poleshift.ning.com in regards to the fly-by-wire system and the EMPs possibly being a cause of some of these crashes or power losses of airplanes. And the models that we're talking about is the Airbus A320 through A380, and the Boeing systems are used primarily on the 777, the 787 Dreamliner, and the new large 747-8. And as you said before, all of these examples are coming from one of those two manufacturers and one of those models. So those are fly-by-wire systems. Like you said, there's a whole bunch of fail-safes. There's redundant systems all over these aircraft, but if you zap it with enough power to basically fry microchips as an EMP, electromagnetic pulse, all it does is fuse microchips together and makes them unable to work.
Right.
You're dead stick. You have no control. You have no power to power out of you have no control of the power. So the airplanes, the engines are going to still sort of run and do crazy things with the radar, but it's really tough to explain this for some other way, and that's why we here at USA EBN have brought in Nancy to kind of flesh out some of these options too, and she does a lot of research, and her team does a lot of research on this too. So research it yourself. That's kind of why we're here, is get you started on.
I kind of compare it to my old Volkswagen, which was 30 years old or whatever. Stick shift, everything was manual. And I'm not even sure we had power brakes. I don't think we did. Everything was just direct, manual, and they were so reliable. One time we had a real deep snowstorm in Milwaukee, 2 feet deep or whatever. None of the other cars could operate, but you could get a Bug to drive because they had the little engine in the back and it wasn't that heavy, and they would plow through snow. And then I remember another time my gears broke, second gear broke, and I had to go from first to third. I didn't have the money to fix it. I went through the winter that way, going from first to third, and everything was fine. They're just so reliable because they're simple. And then when you get the more modern cars, and I joke around about all the magic buttons in the car. Did somebody press one of those magic buttons? Oh, man. Now I don't know if it's locked or unlocked, or if I have to do this or that button, and I hate it. I miss my Bug, So it's like that. In planes that are not as big and fancy, not as comfortable, you're probably a lot safer, where the pilot can push, pull. Maybe, the small planes I know are like that. But mainly, going over those plate borders, going over water, and I think we pretty much pinpointed some dangerous places, right in the middle of the Atlantic, right there in the Mediterranean, over Europe and the Sunda Plate over there where Indonesia is, and those are danger areas. So flying is always dangerous. You take your life into your hands when you go up. We know that. Everyone knows that.
Well, it's
so if
safer
you want
than
to make
driving.
it safer, yes, it is. That's what statistically it is.
Statistically, there's a lot more cars than there are planes, though. So statistically,
yes,
okay.
That's right.
Sure.
that's true. So just a little bug in your ear as to what you might watch out for and what you might consider if you're going to fly. Go the long route instead of or whatever, and get there with greater safety. So what do we mean by the prongs? We're talking about prongs now. In I think it was maybe just at the very start of this year, and we were always anticipating that here at Zeta Talk that Obama was trying to get out there in front of the microphone and say, look, Ronald Reagan wrote a couple of executive orders back in 1983. He said, yes, we've discovered this inbound planet Nibiru that goes through our solar system every 3,600 years, but we're not going to tell anybody about that because people will panic and they can't handle the information. And now I don't have proof that this happened, but that's what the Zetas told me, and have been saying. So cover up over the alien presence, cover up over Nibiru from those two executive orders that Reagan wrote, and that Obama reversed those and said it's okay to talk about it, but everybody's trying to figure out how do you explain to people that you've had 30 years of cover up and that this is real out there, and we're going to have potentially big earthquakes and big tidal waves, and everybody's going to run screaming in the streets, quit their jobs, commit suicide, not pay their mortgages. I mean, the scenarios that the people in charge in government or wherever and the wealthy who have a lot of assets, the scenarios they go through is like, oh, Lord, so, oh, no, we can't do that. So he was trying to get out there to say what I just said, And we tracked this. We were watching. It was supposed to be an emergency broadcast network thing, and there was signs that this was clicking in, and it never got cut wires. People just in, the mid-level whatever, go out there and prevent that. And then Oval Office, well, you have the 30-second delay. And and Obama's lost his mind. He's gone cuckoo, and dragged off in a white coat so he was meeting blockages. And then you had all those suicide attempts. He was down in South Africa, and there was a guy who had violent schizophrenic tendencies, who was standing next to him as the translator, and said that for some reason, I think somebody played with his meds, he was really struggling that day. He went to Israel. Somebody put diesel in his petrol car, armor plated, so that the car would have broke down in the middle of the highway, necessitating a change of vehicles where a sniper could take him out. So he had all these suicide attempts. So it never happened. We went 4 years from mid-2012 all the way to mid-2016. It's been
Seems
4
like
years.
Forever.
And yeah. So finally, somewhere in the middle of all that, according to the Zetas, the Council of Worlds, that's the administrative force, and our globe is a schoolhouse, and our people are supposed to know about this so that we can make spiritual decisions and, suddenly become heroes and care for others, or suddenly get really, really selfish and show our true colors. It's a spiritual schoolhouse, and not letting people know what's coming doesn't help. It's like you're going to have a final exam next Tuesday, but we're not going to mention it until Monday night. Then they don't want that. They want people to know. So they stepped in and got pushy, with some of these blocks, like the media or whatever, and finally they got concessions to where it was going to move forward. And the way it did was in January with what we call prongs. They said it was going to be a multi-pronged approach and that would not stall. It was not just one route. It was like an octopus every which way, and therefore it was going to arrive at the point where everybody knew that Nibiru was in the inner solar system, next to the sun, had arrived in 2003, just as Zeta Talk had predicted. That's what the Zetas said. Okay. In January, and it didn't hit the media until somewhere toward the end of March and early April, it was Planet 9, and then it was everywhere in the media. Somebody Googled that term, Planet 9, and they got like I don't know, 20 or 30 different websites had articles about it. So what was interesting is that in 1995, 20 years ago, the Zetas had said, well, way out there, where Nibiru is coming in and where the infrared team found it in 1983, the sun has a dark binary companion, another sun, same size, never lit, and this planet, Nibiru, goes back and forth between the two of them, and that's standard Zeta talk, right? So I'll read my notes here because it's much clearer. Prong 1 started the process by announcing a newly discovered Planet 9 out in the direction of the constellation Orion, where the infrared team found the inbound Nibiru in 1983. Lots of talk during Prong 1 in terms like exoplanets, prior extinctional level events, the Earth's history with these events, and references to relevant terms like Nibiru and ancient Sumerian. They were reintroducing terms and concepts. But what was so fascinating was the 20 Sun-Pluto distances versus 18.74 Sun-Pluto distances that the Zetas stated. In the articles on Planet 9, and this was a couple of astronomers from Caltech, Brown and Begin, and another guy who was a retired astronomer from Louisiana, Whitmer, had been studying a tugging pulling out in that direction, and they concluded that there's some sort of a planet. They were thinking maybe 10 times as big as the Earth out there, that type of thing. And then they were arguing about, maybe it had an orbit of 15,000 years or maybe 27 million years. So it was this bumbling approach. And was it one object or two? They thought it was just one object. Now, mind you, back in 1983, when the infrared team went and took a look there, the ancient astronomers had noticed the outer planets pulling in that direction for hundreds of years, and that's why they went looking out there and found it with infrared. Anyway, the Zetas in 1995 said 18.74 Sun-Pluto distances. These astronomers said 20. Well, I think that's pretty close. That's Zeta's right again, right?
Yep.
So then they also stated, another thing that Zeta's right again is they had pinpointed in laying out the path of where people should look for Nibiru as it came in, that the lower part of Orion's bow was where the infrared team had found it. This was nowhere in the media. You couldn't find it. The Washington Post article had said on the western edge of Orion, which could be up there by his head, down there by his foot. I mean, they weren't clear. But it was like exactly, Wikipedia article showed where Brown and Baggins said the aphelion of Planet 9 was, and boom, the same location. Zeta's right again. So, in the opinion of the Zetas, Planet 9 is out there where the dark binary twin of the Sun is located. And in 1983, Nibiru was just returning from its passage past that dark twin. Thus, both were located in the same direction. If you're coming straight at me from your house, and I'm looking at your house, I can say, well, I see the house, and then, but I would be confused as to whether you, Andre, were at the house or were coming toward me and were a separate object or not, as long as you were a straight line. So they were talking about Planet Line like one object, and rather than two, but we soon got to two objects. Now, prong one also included a hint that Planet 9 might be two objects, because they started to talk about how it's maybe over there by the constellation Zeta, moved from Orion. And they said this because NASA had a couple of scientists studying probes at Saturn, and it was saying, wait, there's a tug over there. There's a tug near Cetus, and we don't know what that's from, right? Well, actually where Saturn is, it's across the solar system from the constellation Cetus, and so they couldn't be sure if that tug was right there next to the sun where we keep making photographs of Nibiru, or way, way out there. But guess what? On April 20th, when those articles came out, the constellation Cetus just happened to be at the 4 o'clock position to the sun, which is where we always tell people you'll find Nibiru.
Right.
If you look with your filters and the like, there it'll be. So here they were now talking, and there's no way that something that was found out past Orion, and according to Wikipedia, barely moved, just a toe from the bottom of the bow of Orion in 3,000 years, managed to get all the way over to the constellation Cetus in 33 years since 1983. But this wasn't supposed to be logical. This was supposed to be a slow introduction. Meanwhile, astronomers bumbling and arguing and coming from every which way, right?
Right.
Okay. Let's see. Now we have what the Zeta is called prong 2. And I expect we're going to have prong 3 also before this is all over. Prong 2 set out to address the next step, which is how to explain an exoplanet arriving in the inner solar system when so many high-tech scans of the heavens have not noticed it. Prong 2, per the Zetas, began when it was announced that whereas the WISE and Hubble and Kepler probes were looking way out, and doing afar, in 2010, the ESO Observatory in Chile had discovered exoplanets closer in that were overlooked by these other scans. Well, they talk about, the Hubble and WISE and Kepler way out, and the nebula and the beautiful pictures, and and they're making all these excuses now. In order to be seen by WISE, you have to be a certain size, or you have to exude heat. And if it was a cool planet and didn't have volcanic whatever, then you'd miss it. So they're now making all these excuses, because up until now, anytime anybody would say, we're seeing two suns rise and set, and we think there's something over there next to the sun, and they said, nah, don't listen to Nancy Leader. If Nibiru was around, the WISE system would find it. It would be part of our sky scanning. We'd have noticed it. Well, now the ESO is saying we actually have these, I don't know how many, quite a few, little exoplanets that we found that are closer to our solar system, because we're earthbound. We're not up there with probes up above the atmosphere. We're stuck, and we notice things, so who knows what's close in, right? But how to explain a gravity draw out beyond Orion and an exoplanet nearby, as these are two objects, and the whole Planet 9 noise was all about one object, right? Enter the Lund University in Sweden, yet another astronomer, this time from Sweden. Lund theorized that Planet 9 was stolen from our solar system long ago by another sun. Lund was introducing the dark binary twin of the Earth in theory, or the dark binary twin of the sun. He was saying, well, how could we have something way out there? And the diagram they showed when you went to the Lund University article that was hitting the news, and it's just picking up steam. It's being repeated and populated with various excuses about how the WISE system and the Kepler probe and all that would miss something, that must close in. So anyway, in this diagram, they have two suns, right and left, and they have like an orbit drawn around them, big circles, and where they touch in the very center, there's planet 9. And it's clearly, visually saying, this poor planet was caught right between these two suns, tugged this way, tugged that way. Well, right out of Zeta Talk, right, where they talk about the approach and then it slings past, and then it's got both gravity draws behind it, and it turns around, slings past again, and how it got into that orbit, which is an odd orbit, coming out of the Big Bang. That's the way the Zetas describe it. And it's been that way, and it can't get out. It's stuck, because of the way, the speed and the gravity pulls, and it's everything. They go through all this technical explanation. Well, Lund University is talking about that. 4.5 billion years ago, theoretically, that, Planet 9, this planet, could have been part of our solar system, and another planet came by, another sun came by and tugged it away, and made it an exoplanet, and so they're here they go. They keep introducing Zeta's right again. Once again, now we're talking about two suns, binary suns, and a planet, floating back and forth between the two of them in something, so we're in prong 2, and we're already talking about the binary sun and a planet, with a weird orbit between two suns, and how come we could have something in close seen from Saturn at the 4 o'clock position to the sun, and presumably seen from Earth too, because Saturn is behind us right now. So I'm waiting for them to say, "Oh, look,
there it is.
There is something there."
We told you.
And
we told you.
Shrouded by all this red dust. So that's how come we missed it, because it's got all this red dust around it, and
nothing to do with the spraying of guys.
No, that it's not the incompetence of the. Okay, within days, this aspect of prong 2, the Lund University theory, began appearing on websites and on TV news with the addition of various theories on how an exoplanet could hide from man's long view scans, such as WISE or Kepler or Hubble. If the planet were cold, it would not show up except on infrared scans, as was done in 1983. That was an infrared look, and then they found it. And the Cetus tug is mentioned again in these articles, but for an object way, way out in space. Oh, we think it's way out there. But if you're in Saturn looking towards Cetus, you can't tell if it's close by the sun or way out there. I mean, that's a 2D kind of a thing. There is no way to determine direction, yes, distance, no. But the Cassini probe near Saturn was looking across the solar system at Cetus. Perhaps the direction was correct, but the distance was not. On that basis, an exoplanet, yes, our very own Nibiru, could be right there next to the sun, and the Cassini probe tug would fit. It would make sense. We are now waiting for the next shoe to drop.
Quick question, Nancy.
Sure.
On prong 2, before we get into the next level that is soon to come out, we questioned from the chat room from, I believe it was Travis, wondering about, I know you mentioned the Lund University, the Swedish university astronomer. What about the Mercury transit and the SLU astronomer Paul Cox, who pointed out on a live webcast about two suns and that they're normal, and then later backtracked it, and then later doubled down and tossed out Nibiru. After that, I couldn't find articles on SLU or Paul Cox saying those things, meaning it had been scrubbed either off of social media or somehow retracted. But I did watch the live Mercury transit, and they had a telescope on the sun and then a sun the same size next to it, out of screen, partially in screen, partially out of screen. So it could have been one of those things when you're doing and looking at a solar eclipse, you point the telescope at the sun, and then the eyepiece you take off, and then have that eyepiece project onto a piece of paper, which is going to show you if there's multiple people doing these with telescopes, it will show multiple objects of the sun. What concerns me and what Travis brought up was they pulled back on that really quickly and never really got to the bottom of it. Do you have any information, or did you cover this in any of the?
Yeah, I did. There was some. I think we covered it in one of the newsletters, and I do have quotes. I'm quickly looking for it.
Okay.
But there it is, slow admissions. On the May 29th newsletter, the last feature, goody. Okay, here we are. And it says, during the recent transit of Mercury.
Paul Cox, I believe.
Yes, it is, COX. He's a slow astronomer on live TV. They claimed he was joking around, and this is, I have an article from the mainslow.com website. Well, and of course that's theirs, So in a rare event, which only occurs a few times a century, blah, blah, the transit. And his comments went viral on the internet, and here's his comments. Mercury is just to the right, about the 2 o'clock or 1:30 position on that top right edge, and it did. It went up around and crossed the sun and popped out at the 2 o'clock. Now, can you see that mysterious glow on the right-hand side? It was like a flare or a ghost or something, It wasn't even crisp enough to be a planet, Can you see that mysterious glow? Yeah. On the right-hand side, yes, it was a sun reflection. What do you reckon that is? Do you think it's the mysterious planet Nibiru that may be appearing in my shots? We don't cover things like that up, but like NASA does. We don't cover things up like NASA does. That's what he said. Tell me what you think that is. And then he says, you may be asking yourself, what is that large round thing next to the sun? Well, that's our second sun. I don't know if you knew that we had a second sun, but there it is. It's normally hidden from view. NASA and other organizations, well, they normally hide that stuff away from us, but there it is. It's true. So somebody on some message board wrote slow, and they wrote back and said, oh, Paul was just making jokes. Regarding a reflection we were getting in the telescope. But he didn't have to bring up second sun and Nibiru, he did. And he didn't have to say NASA covers these things up, but we're open. But he did, And if you want those direct quotes, they're on the May 29th newsletter 504 on my website.
Yeah,
it
just threw me off. I don't know a whole lot of... Yeah, I just don't know a whole lot of astronomers are that jokey. They're usually
they're not.
pretty tight. No.
Yeah, I mean, they're nerds. They're nerds. If you ever go to the NASA hangout,
he did get fired, right?
Huh?
Yeah,
and that's another thing. And really, you got it takes a bit of courage, because so many people, hundreds of astronomers had been killed over the decades, saying we need to tell people about this inbound thing, and the end times are coming, and they would have an accident, brake lines cut, odd heart attacks, whatever, and suicided or whatever, and these guys know that. They know that. They probably have personal friends, and the stories get around, So here we have 2 Caltech astronomers, and the guy who's a retired, Whitmer, probably up there in years or whatever, and they were, and back in late March or April and going into May, they're talking about extinction level events. In order to get people to read these articles and start getting educated, they had out there, well, we're gonna die. And Whitmer says it might start as soon as April 2016. Well, he never said that. It was never a direct quote. And apparently he was talking about debris, that when this Planet 9 thing that he's surmising comes through, that there might be a lot of hail and debris and this kind of stuff So he could back away and say, "I never said that. They misunderstood," or because there was no direct quote. I really checked, but the guy had to have courage to do that. He was told, not only are you going to go out there and talk about the tug past Orion, but you're also going to talk. You're going to be made a fool of. You're going to talk about extinction level events like it's going to happen in April, and then say, no, I was misquoted. Well, the slow guy too, here it is, get out there and say these things, and then later, back away, we'll put you in a closet. It's risky because it's not where somebody's going to give you a gold star. So
right.
Congratulations to these guys for having the courage to do this.
Well, it's courageous, sure, but you can't. I don't think they can just come right out and say it. I think that everybody that comes right out and says it or tries to say it happens to have an accident or gets their reputation thrown under the bus. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah.
But he does have a point about NASA hiding things. We know that to be a fact, and at the end of the day, it's really up to the individual to decide what seems right to you. Does it make sense? Do these puzzle pieces all fit into Planet X passage and pole shift? Or, for you as a person, maybe, do some research. I think that, all of these things are pretty well laid out on the poleshift.ning.com site as well as the zetatalk.com site, looking at those newsletters. And then especially on the Poleshift Ning site, there's a lot of different blogs that discuss different aspects of the evidence of the oncoming pole shift, where earthquake lights and sound, like we talked before, which would involve also EMP. But that's where I got started. I was looking at pole shift because I was interested. I had a hankering to get some more information. It was early 2011. I found poleshift.ning.com and I said, "Wow, these guys are on it."
Yep.
Now that was a while ago, Nancy.
Yeah.
That was a while ago.
Yeah. It documents very well how the Earth's magnetosphere is getting twisted and walloped, and the wobble where the sun will come up and set in the wrong place. People document that. That's wobble mechanics. The weather gone wild is just following the wobble. Many pictures of Nibiru, not only from people's cameras, but as captured on SOHO. This is a NASA satellite that takes pictures of the sun, and they try to airbrush out Nibiru itself, but all the moon squirrels flying around, practically on a daily basis. And there's a website over in Italy, a Nibiru Daily. It's a blog, and as the sun goes down, there's a gentleman in Germany who captures this webcam every darn day. There it is, and you can see the shoulder pads of the two dominant moon swirls on either side of Nibiru. It's all there on the pole shift Ning, and a lot of hard-working people. Yes, it's a big team, and they work darn hard.
So, Nancy, we've got prong 1 and prong 2 of the 3 or 8, 12-pronged offensive of getting the information to the common man. What do you think? What is your hint for the next prong?
I think it'll be 3, and I think it'll be by the end of summer. That's my hunch. I don't know that that's true, but
mess with our election cycle.
I think prong 3 is going to start talking about we've got something in the inner solar system, and arguing about that. Could it be that type of thing? So we're getting real close. If they're talking about, Cetus and close in, and the ESO can find them, and the WISE and the Hubble cannot, and and it's moving pretty quickly. It clicks right along, really. If you get a week that nothing seems to be happening, it's usually being published in scientific journals, and then the regular popular media picks it up and says, "Well, look at what was published in Astronomers Weekly or whatever," and boom, So this is definitely moving. It's not stalled at all. Yeah.
I think, though, as we move forward, too, as we get in the United States especially, as we get closer to our November elections, I think that our government, as it is right now, will either, and this is just my hunch, and it's not much of a, this is not the opinion of the Zetas or the network, but I just think as we get closer to the election in the fall, we're going to see more evidence of preparations by either the federal government or FEMA or Ready.gov putting out a bunch of announcements. And, you know, I'll call it the drip, drip, drip of disclosure of Planet X or the alien presence at this point. I mean, they kind of go hand in hand because we're getting our information here on this show. A lot of it is coming from the media and reports, but a lot of the analysis is coming from the Zetas, who are, you know, friends of ours from far away. As we get closer, just for you folks that are interested, just keep an eye on the media. When they start dropping things about interstellar objects, that's not by mistake. It's slowly coming out, and they say they don't want the common man to know about what's going on because they can't handle it. Well, meanwhile, Texas has been flooded for the past 2 weeks and will continue to be flooded for the next probably most of the spring. Well, that was predicted by the Zetas right after the drought deluge cycle. California, Colorado, Texas. I mean, this is part of the wobble and part of, you know, we're going to see bigger quakes.
Yes. Yep. That's what they said. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Exactly right. And so stay tuned, folks, because it's just starting to get interesting.
Well, thanks again, Nancy, and thanks for answering questions from the chat today. You can, like I said before, Nancy is kind enough to take the audio from this episode and load it up onto the YouTube channel. You can find the Zeta Report on YouTube at the Nancy Leader channel on YouTube. The website for USAEBN is usaebn.org, and don't forget to check out poleshift.ning.com as well as zetatalk.com for more information about what we talked about today. Nancy, thanks again. Great job.
Yeah,
and
thank
hopefully
you,
we get an announcement. Thanks. Hopefully we get an announcement of some sort of something going on. Absolutely. You've been listening to Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live first Mondays of every month, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Check us out at our main site, usaebn.org. Stay safe, everyone.